Welcome, everybody, to my career advice for new graduates. My name is Peter Harrison. I'm with the Palisades Foundation, and I'm going to give you some tips based on my experience in general in the working world. This is really going to be focused on the IT services industry, which is now growing and competitive. A lot of the advice that I'm going to provide you with may not necessarily be applicable in a situation where the industry is not growing and it's not competitive, because it's a different type of management style that is going to be required in those situations than those that you find in an IT services industry. And so what I want to talk about initially is what is success. And many people want to know what the success is, but they also want to know what the foundations are. And for many of you, the foundations of success are going to be education and experience. And why is that? Well, for the most part, all of you feel that education and experience will provide you with opportunity, which is obvious. Life goes up and down. And so therefore, you need to start thinking in a slightly different way. I would say that the foundations of success are not so much used for the creation of opportunity, but the foundations of success, education and experience, are the foundations for choice. And so at different times in your life, you're going to find that the menu of education and experience that you can present to an organization is going to change. Sometimes you're going to be thinking about the appetizers. Sometimes you're going to be thinking about the desserts. Sometimes you want to have a vegetarian option. Life is going to change, and you're going to have to bring different types of skills to bear. And one of the things that I have seen in my experience is that everyone who I've ever worked with who has been upset or angry or dissatisfied with their job has been dissatisfied because they don't have that choice. And so when you're thinking about choices, what you want to be thinking about is, how are you going to be able to maximize your lifetime happiness? Now, people will say that this is not a good choice because there are other things that people can have, and I agree. But it's one extreme of your maximization of your life goals. The other end would be to try and think of ways in which you want to maximize your lifetime wealth. And so anytime you're making that choice, you need to be thinking about, will this make me happy in the long term, or will it make me richer in the long term? Or is it going to be, where is it going to be in that spectrum? You're never really sure what it's going to be. And so always think about your jobs and your choices in the career that you're planning on going into in those terms. If you think that you may want to move to a different organization with a slightly lower salary, but that will give you more chances of having more maximizing your lifetime wealth, then that may be something to consider. And so these things that we do in life need to be thought of in this way. And so with choice, you should also be thinking about a resignation letter. And the reason why is because if you have one, it's one less thing to prevent you from making that choice. And I would suggest that if you're going to be doing it in your career, that you create one now. And it needs to be very, very plain. The wording can be very simple. It can be like this: I regret to inform you that I will unfortunately not be able to continue working in your organization due to career opportunities that are regrettably not available here. I have seen your organization grow from a fledgling institution to an impressive reality, and my resignation is effective in 2 weeks' time. Something very simple. The reason for this is because you don't have to worry about what I'm going to write. You've already put yourself in the frame of mind that your job may be temporary. And then the third thing is that when you write your your resignation letter, and you have it in this very generic format, you don't find yourself burning your bridges. The people will remember the resignation as being rather normal, and you can go away. Now, you may want to come back and take different action depending upon the circumstances of your resignation, but and that may vary according to various circumstances. But if you have one, think about creating one now for those three reasons that I just mentioned. And so I want to talk specifically about resumes. They have things that we all have, like they talk about skills, they talk about your capabilities, and they talk about responsibility. All these things are very obvious. You're in school, you've come at the top of your class, you show the responsibilities you have. You may be a club president, or you may be um, someone who has taken initiative with a charity of some sort, and you write these things down. But many managers will really want to be finding people who are interesting in a number of ways. They want to find people who can come into a situation that they have in their business right now. They want to know what actions you are going to propose to take, and therefore they want to figure out what that result is going to be. So in your resumes, in some places, there's going to be a bias towards people who can get things done. And if in your resume you can write about a situation, the action that you took, and the result as a very simple bullet point, then you'll be in a much better location in the queue for the manager to want to hire you. And so the things that you can say are, I came into my organization, I noticed that the build times for the main production suite was too long. I researched new methodologies to make it shorter, and the result was that we were able to make releases twice as fast as normal, and that was a key function of the company increasing its revenue by 20%. And so that automatically, from the manager's perspective, means that you get things done, you work independently, hopefully, and that you can have a meaningful impact on their organization. And so because of this, what I'd recommend also is that different countries are going to value this situation, action, result, methodology differently. Some countries may not want it, some people will want it. And because each country is going to be different, I would suggest that you write your resumes and have it targeted by country. And if it means hiring a resume service in each of the countries that you're thinking about sending a resume to, all the better. They will know what the format is like, what the hiring managers are looking for. Quite frequently you'll think, well, I can write my own resume. But people who do resume writing as a profession, day in, day out, know what is required right now. And so therefore, you'll find it a very valuable thing. You'll think at the beginning that it's like a large amount of money, but what is a relatively small amount of money in comparison to your lifetime wealth? That is what you should be thinking about in the long term. And so therefore, if you can, look on the web. If you're thinking about applying for jobs in another country, find a resume service in that country that seems decent and get your resume done and target it. Very much so. I really recommend this. And in some places, you're going to find that you can put your resume online. And what I would recommend in those cases is that you update your online resume weekly. There's a good reason for this. Depending on the marketplace, and I'm going to be talking specifically about the United States, which is an area that I have a little more experience in, recruiters tend to be lazy. They will look for resumes that have been updated in the last 7 days, because people who have updated their resume in the last 7 days are actively seeking a job. And so therefore it is much more likely that that person would respond to an email or a phone call from them. And what you'll find is that many people will get laid off, or they get into the job market and they put their resumes online. They get a lot of results in the first week, then second week it's not so much, and the third week it seems to die away, and then you find yourself being devastated by the fact that nobody's interested in what you can bring to the table. And what I say is try updating your resume every week. Just change the timestamp in whatever way you can. So whether it just be adding a full stop or adding a new line, save it every weekend, and you'll see a constant stream of interest from the various people in the job seeking world. So I want to talk about an interview strategy that will help with you finding work. And that strategy really comes down to applying to as many related jobs as you want to apply to. I'm not saying to apply to the job that you really want to apply to. I'm saying apply to related jobs. And the reason for this is because you want practice. You want practice so that when you find the job that you really want, you come across as being just natural and well informed. But how can you be truly sure that you're well informed of the things that managers are going to be requiring right now in the marketplace? The way you do that is that you apply to these related jobs. And many of these interviews that you're going to have are not going to be important. So if you fail, it doesn't matter. And what you want to be doing in these interviews is trying to get as many questions asked that you may not have an answer to. And so I'll give you an example right now. You go into an interview, you sit down, somebody asks you, tell me, what do you know about X? And you will look at the person and say, I'm sorry, I don't know anything about X. Doesn't matter, because it's not the real job that you want, but you know that a hiring manager is going to ask that question at some point. Again, what do you know about X? You go back home, you do some research on the web, you know everything about X. You go to another interview about a related job, and you get asked the same question, but in a different way. They're going to ask you maybe even a different topic. They will ask, what do you know about Y? And you will say, I'm sorry, I don't know anything about Y, but if it's anything like X, this is the way I would try to do it. Now, eventually, you're going to find yourself answering those questions over and over again, that you'll know everything from A to Z. And when that job comes along that you really, really want, then you will be able to do it in a way that is most natural, and you'll be the most engaging that you would ever want to be. People will say to me, well, Peter, why do that? What happens if you get a job offer from one of these other companies? So what do you do? And if you have the confidence that this is not the right job, you tell them no. And so you continue with the strategy until you get the right thing. So you update your resume every week, try to go to as many interviews as you can, because you want to get that practice. And when you get the job, I recommend that you talk with your manager on a one-to-one basis frequently. And there's a number of things that I will talk about a little later, but you want to get the attention of your manager so that you can understand what he or she is thinking in the long term as well as the short term. And in these sessions, what you want to do is to ask for what you want. And you want to make things clear. You're going to be in these one-on-one situations with your manager. There's no other people in the room. The manager doesn't have to make as much, doesn't have to deal with the dynamic of all the other people inside the room. You don't have to deal with the other people. You can ask questions in which you can feel safer, hopefully, if your manager is the right type of manager, and they will have an idea as to where you want to go, what you want to do. You really want to make sure that they understand your career path and how you want to maximize your lifetime wealth or your lifetime happiness, depending on the spectrum between the two that you want to be in. You're going to find that you're going to require a lot of persistence. And as you move up in the work world, there's going to be greater and greater competition. You probably started out, depending on your situation in schools, and you're competing against people in your schools at the elementary level. Then you go up into the high school level, but you're now dealing, the selections in schools tend to start at that level, and you find yourself competing against some of the better people in all the elementary schools, in the high school environment. And then when you get up into the university level, you're competing against all the brighter people in the high school system in your university. And so you're going to find more and more people like you, and therefore you're going to find the competition higher and greater, etc. And everybody is going to be trying to find ways to stand out. And one of the ways in which you can stand out is that you can be first. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be first in your class. You could be first in a way of thinking, or first or actually doing something. But being first often helps. And you want to be best in it as well. And this is something else that you can be thinking about. But it's very, very different. It can be, the best can change according to the situation. And of course, you can be different. And that is another area that you can think of. But ideally, if you can be two of these, have two of these characteristics in most of the situations that you find yourselves in, you will have an advantage. So if you're first and different, then that can be helpful. If you're best and different, that can be helpful. If you're first and best, that you in many cases you can't be the absolute at the top of all of these three categories. But if you can think of ways in which you can take advantage of this, that can be very, very useful. And you're going to be wanting to think about this, and you're in the path to moving up. And I want to talk about poor documentation and the way that it can poison culture. And people don't think of documentation as being a source of threat to an organization, but it can be. I'll give you an example, and this is very, very common in organizations that are expanding very, very rapidly. So you start out with a small team, 2 or 3 people, and everybody knows how everything else works. Bring on 1 or 2 more people, it's not too bad. You haven't documented things really, really well, but the systems are smaller, and everybody can pitch in a little bit so that the knowledge goes around. And you have this core team of about 3 or 4 people, and the organization works very well. But then what happens is that something happens. They get a new customer, get new investment, and the company expands very, very rapidly, very, very powerfully, in which you may double or triple the team. And in the beginning, the first 3 or 4 people are going to love this. They're going to say, wow, people are going to be talking to them about what the systems are like, how they work, etc. And there's going to be a certain sense of pride in the systems that they've created, and they'll be happy. But then, because the documentation hasn't been written well, people are going to be constantly calling them about what to get things done, how to get things done. And eventually, the team members are going to say, well, I can do it myself. Don't worry. I'll stick to the other things that you're doing. I'll do it. But that doesn't help people become more independent. And eventually what happens is that those 3 or 4 people that started in the organization don't have any time to have vacation. They don't have any time to go and do the things they like and love. And they begin to resent the organization. And then these people become people that nobody wants to talk to. And because of that, you now have a culture that is poisoned. if you can, in your organization, it never seems like a good thing, but try to get the documentation done properly so that others can be onboarded quickly, that your team can scale, that everybody understands the process and procedures to get things done, and there's been less ambiguity. You have more chances of being successful, and you can do all of those things in an environment that is not stressful. That's really, really important for anyone because you don't want to be unhappy in your job. You're going to be working very soon with middle managers. And in my opinion, middle managers have the worst tech job ever. And this is the reason why. Most of them started out with their peers. Everybody came in from university at the same time, or the group was formed at the same time, and so everybody knows everybody at that very beginning. And these team members have more short-term goals. They have a scrum, they have a project, whatever it may be. It tends to be shorter term, related to a quarter, maybe 2 quarters, but not necessarily an entire financial year. And that is what the senior managers are thinking about. They are thinking about the long-term goals. Your team is thinking about the short-term goals. Senior managers are thinking about ways to do more with less. Your team is thinking about ways to do more with more. And so you now find yourself stuck in between the longer-term view and the short-term view. And quite frequently, there's no one to talk to. So something that you need to think about is, how do you manage your manager? And hopefully your manager is an enlightened one. And if you are an adult manager, you have a checklist of things that you're going to be doing to make sure that your team functions well. So you want to make sure that the manager has a mature outlook on life. In all the situations in which there is tension, they are the ones that will always be remembered as being the adult. They have to be consistent as much as possible. And if they are consistent, then the risk of undermining your authority because of that lack of consistency, because people don't know what exactly you're going to say, or you become unpredictable, then you may be avoided in certain situations. You want to be fair but firm, and you want to delegate. You're going to be delegating authority and knowledge. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more a little later. But delegating authority and knowledge for many is difficult. And so I'll talk about strategies for that a little later. You also, as a manager, want to make sure that you can be getting advice. You ask for advice and have no shame. If you don't ask for advice, you're more likely to have mistakes, and then your career will be limited. And you need to think about ways in which that can be done. You want to be providing meaningful praise to people, because if you don't provide that with your team, then you're not going to be viewed as being sincere. And then last but not least, you need to trust your team. You give them the tools that they need. You make sure that the senior management isn't interfering too much in their work and goals, and that they are not pushing back too much on the other areas. But you want to make sure that there's that degree of trust. And that's really, really important. And I want to talk about managing managers. And managers have a dilemma. All of these middle managers have a choice between 2 competing needs. And the first one is that they don't want unpleasant surprises. They are working in an environment that is stressful, and the thing that they would least want to happen is to have a crisis that is unpredicted. And I can tell you, unpleasant surprises is the only reason why people get fired. And you'll say, no, there are all these other reasons. There are reasons like there was insubordination, or they didn't meet a goal, or they were consistently late, or um, or the CEO didn't meet their standards or their expectations for revenue. But in all of those scenarios that I just presented, somebody was surprised, and it was unpleasant for the manager to deal with it. And so you want to make sure that when you're dealing with your manager that you limit unpleasant surprises. But at the same time, managers want to be interrupted the least amount of times possible, and because that helps them to focus. So how do you minimize interruptions and also prevent the unpleasant surprises that I was mentioning before? One way in which you can do this is to have office hours, to do this one-on-one meeting that I was talking about. Many managers will have a fixed time in which that can be done. Hopefully you can talk to your manager about having a fixed time for you, so you can talk to them about some things that you have. It's a time in which you can tell them that you just want to field queries, just have a little time to focus in a way that I don't have the distractions of the rest of the team. And it'll allow you to have time to research and plan your thoughts. Quite often, if you're researching things and every time you come up with a new idea, you interrupt your manager to say, I found this new idea, what do you think? That is another interruption that they have to deal with. And if the manager has 5 or 6 people in their team and they're being interrupted 7 or 8 times a day, that's 8, that could be easily dozens and dozens of interruptions per day, whether it be calls or discussions or chats, etc. And that now becomes an issue for them because throughout the day they don't have a chance to think about what they need to get done for more than 5 minutes at a time. And so if you can, use the opportunity to be independent. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. So if your manager doesn't view you as being a servant, they're going to want to see these sorts of characteristics. And one of the characteristics that they want to see in the business is that they want to see creative outcomes, because creative outcomes come from effective teams. And effective teams will be independent. They will be independent in thought, independent in research, and independent in opinion. And so with this independence, you can do this on your own. You can then go back to your manager in the one-to-one meetings, or whatever the meetings will be. And then at that time, what you want to do is to provide a solution, not options. You're going to be providing them with lots of options, but of all of the options, you want to have a preferred one, because inevitably, the manager, if you provide a number of options, and the first thing the manager is going to ask is, which one do you think is the best? And so you might as well just think about which one you think is best and be prepared to defend it. Now, this may not necessarily be the case in all managerial environments. This is something that I've found works best in the work world that I have worked with. And so you should start thinking about this in terms of managing your manager. Because your manager is going to want to have time off. They're going to want to have vacations, enjoy themselves. And in all of this, escalate quickly, and especially with some time to recover. Because once again, you don't want to be providing these unpleasant surprises, unexpected surprises. And so if you can use your one-on-one relationships with your boss to say, this is the situation, these are the risks. If this risk occurs, then we can have these alternative options. When those alternative options need to be made or taken, escalate those quickly and let the manager know, because that is an exceptional situation. That is not business as usual. And so if you can think of ways in which you can predict the most likely outcomes in bad situations and say, we have a solution for this sort of thing, then you'll be in a better position to defend yourself and also help with your lifetime goals. And all of these things that I'm talking about are really about normal conditions. And there's going to be times when the manager is going to want to delegate. And when that delegation occurs, they are going to be delegating knowledge, as I mentioned before. They're going to be doing responsibility as well. And that is going to be typically top down. The managers can't know absolutely everything. They're going to have to trust people beneath them that they know more than them in certain areas, and that the people beneath them do so as well. And it is that level of trust that hopefully will make the operation better. But then quite frequently, people at the lower level will escalate directly to a senior manager, bypassing the middle manager. And what this does is that it potentially undermines the authority of the middle manager. And that just adds to their stress. This just adds to the uncomfortable situation that they find themselves in. And so an effective senior manager will say, refer to your middle manager first under this normal circumstances. Not saying that in times of crisis you wouldn't want to do some of this bypassing if you have a war room to try and get things done. But a good senior manager will refer back to the middle manager to try and see how regular, normal things should be handled. And that helps to develop the degree of trust in the chain of command and a trust in making things work. It helps with creating an organization that is independent, and that is key. And so this trust that I talked about comes from creating independent teams. Hopefully, if a manager can let go, can delegate, and understand how things work, allow people to operate with autonomy, then you can be more agile. And that's going to be very, very important in a competitive work world, like I was mentioning before. So I'm talking about the chain of command, and it has to be adaptable in crisis, and sometimes, of course, when you're dealing with knowledge workers, it's really, really important. But for the most part, try as much as possible to adhere to the chain of command, and hopefully your management organization respects it and therefore creates an environment that becomes something that would be useful for you and make your life a lot easier. And so there's always going to be a crisis. Things are never always going to be perfect. Things go wrong. And when that happens, calmly fix the issue, because I've seen many people panic, really and truly. Try and think of being calm. Have an objective post-mortem so you can know what happened or what happened and why. And the big thing is that you don't want to be doing any public shaming. And public shaming really is not suitable in a knowledge worker type environment. There's lots of social media. People can spread things around and say all sorts of things. They can take videos, etc. It also working in an environment in which you feel that you'll be publicly shamed means that you probably won't be escalating anything to anybody, and nobody will be able to be agile or be able to take preventive actions, and so therefore your team becomes less agile. It creates a level of distrust, etc. And so it really, really negatively impacts the culture of an organization. And if somebody's made a mistake, hopefully there'll be coaching that's one-on-one, and that allows you to learn from your mistakes. It's really, really helpful, provides people with more self-confidence the next time something like this happens, provides them with options and learning experience to improve themselves, because for the most part, people don't want to sabotage the company. People don't want to sabotage their careers. And so take that into consideration, err on the side of caution, not so much on caution, but err on the side that people want to see and have an improved life, and that they don't usually do things that are bad because they are trying to be malicious. And so you try as much as possible to work with them to get to where you want to be. And if there's going to have to be any sort of disciplinary action, try as much as possible to do it one-on-one. For the same reason, people interpret things differently. And you want to make sure that if you're going to be doing a lot of these sorts of criticisms, either typically going to be constructive criticism, you want to do it in an environment in which the person feels safer. And that's going to be really important. Okay, so I'm going to give you some advice on job switching in large companies. Now, in large companies that are multinational, they have a very large sets of groups of companies, large sets of divisions. Each division has lots of teams. Many companies just hire people and then reallocate them to various divisions according to need. And some of the larger tech companies do this. You apply to a job and you may find yourself going through a number of interviews, and the person that you thought was going to be the hiring manager isn't the hiring manager. You move over to somewhere else, and you can be disappointed. And so now you're in this new organization, you don't know what to do. This is not what you thought you're going to get into, or you could find yourself in the same team that you thought you're going to get into, but you're unhappy. And what do you do in a situation like that? How do you move around in a large company easily? And they're going to tell you that you have to stick in your job for a year, which is more or less true. And they are going to also say to look at the internal job postings for jobs, and that is another thing that you could look at. But I have a more subtle strategy that I think you should also consider. So if you find yourself angry and upset about the job that you have in a larger company, you need to start thinking and thinking differently. And the way that I would suggest that you start thinking is like this. You go and talk to a manager in a different division or different group, and you just talk to them and say, look, I'm really interested in what your group does. This is an area that I've had an interest in for quite some time. I am thinking about my next move within the organization, and I thought that working with you would be great. And you'll have a little discussion. It could be coffee or it could be tea. Doesn't necessarily have to be a formal environment in which you're sitting behind a desk. It could be lunch or coffee. And the reason why you want to do it in this scenario or this methodology is because it doesn't seem threatening either to the manager or to you. It's more informal, and they tend to be a little more open. And they're going to tell you about all sorts of things, but the thing that you want to ask them is, what keeps you up at night? Where are things going wrong in your organization? And remember, I was telling you that middle managers quite often have nobody to talk to. And so they will now find themselves in a relatively informal situation, talking about somebody who's eager to come into your team, and you're asking questions that most people would want to know, like where the manager is going to talk about things that are going well for them. But then if you ask them about things that are not going so well, you would be surprised. Many people cannot have these middle managers, and managers in general are always looking for new ways of tackling problems. And they'll just talk to people if they feel that it's in a non-threatening environment. You are in a completely different division. You're not a senior person, you're not a junior person. You're effectively a neutral party. And so you ask these questions. And like I was saying before, because this person has never had the opportunity to speak to anybody, to talk to their senior managers, sometimes it feels, I've been talking to my senior manager, it doesn't really work out that well. I've been talking to my team, doesn't work out that well. They can talk to somebody that they can hopefully trust. And the next question you're going to ask them is, this is really interesting. Is there anybody else on your team that I can talk to about these problems? And they'll say, yeah, sure. Talk to these people. Give me an email introduction, and you go and you have another meeting with each of those people. And you do the same thing. You go and ask them what do you do? What is successful? What keeps you up at night? What are the things that crash and break in the night that need to be fixed? And then you get all these answers and you create a list. All the answers of all the things that are problems in that organization. And you send it to the manager, the original manager, and you say to them, this is what I think your group really needs. I would like to come in and fix these 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 things within the organization, because that, I think, is where I would be most effective. And the manager was going to say, well, it's a large organization. They'll probably say, well, I don't have a requisition for it, or maybe they do. But of course, I'm going to have to create a job description for this role, because this is the strategy for the company. And you can just tell them, don't worry, use this checklist as the basis for the job description. So what does this mean? You have effectively written your own job description for the job that you want. Who is going to get the job? You are having a much higher likelihood of getting the job as a result of this. And this is a strategy that you can use. It has worked for me a few times. Hopefully it can work for you as well. So, coming to an end, what is the general plan? Plan is to try and find ways in which you can maximize your lifetime wealth, your lifetime happiness, find ways to expand your choices, master the job search, find ways to manage your manager, find ways to manage your team. And if you can do that, you'll look like a rock star within your organization. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
So you talked about reaching out to another manager or area to find out, what keeps them up at night. If you are in an organization, how much time should you give yourself? A year, 2 years, 18 months? What do you suggest?
It depends on the organization, but typically in almost most job scenarios, you want to be working there for about a year. And the reason for that is because you want to get experience through an entire business cycle. And therefore, doing it for a year will go through a budgeting cycle, a delivery cycle, recruitment cycles, and things like that. And so you'll be able to have a much more rounded experience, and that may be something that you can work with as well. All right, I'm just going to go around the table and just ask directly. There are only about 4 or 5 of you here. So, Disha, do you have any questions about this?
I don't have any questions, but I'll be starting my job soon. So I believe this would be really helpful for me. So thank you so much for sharing your experience.
All right, you're welcome. Glenn, do you have any questions?
I particularly don't have questions about the job scenario. I just had a question like, what factors would you consider for finding a co-founder for a particular venture or idea?
Like what sectors did you say for finding a co-founder in a startup company? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, for a startup or company.
Okay.
What factors would you consider?
Yeah, that's a good question. In general, if you're going to be looking for a job, and this is very, 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 very generic advice, try as much as possible to find a job or think of an industry that is growing rapidly. When an industry is growing rapidly, there's more opportunity. And then when you find that industry, and it could be any, that AI is a big thing, it could be biotech, it could be FinCom, that sort of stuff, but find something that's expanding rapidly. And then in that sector, try and find a company that is expanding or doing well within that rapidly expanding group. And then from there, you'll find yourself in a much better position. You're in the best of the scenario that you want to be. If you can, and once again, this depends upon the type of organization, try as much as possible to be or working in the headquarters city of the organization. And the reason for that is because when the times get bad, the headquarters city usually gets hit the least. And then, of course, if you can, within the headquarters city, work in the headquarters office, the headquarters staff tends to be spared for the most part. And so that is something that you can think of in terms of just general advice. If you're thinking about startups, there are different rounds of funding for startups. There's the angel side, in which friends and family might put money into a company to get it off the ground, just to create a proof of concept. Then after that, they'll go to venture capitalists and they'll get what they call an initial Series A round of capital. And so that would be the next step and the expectation is from a proof of concept to MVP, a minimum viable product. And that's going to be something like about the Series A area. And then when a company gets Series B round, that is when they are starting to look for new customers and expand. And by that time, if a company has succeeded until about Series B funding, there's a better chance that they're going to survive. And if you're looking for companies to work with, start with companies of that nature. Start with Series B companies, B, C, D, and your chances of having success would be better. Most startup founders are more concerned about finding capital in the beginning. They have an idea, they know who their core team is to get them to where they need to be, and they just need to find the money to sponsor that team and maybe one or two other people. And the venture capitalists, generally speaking, don't know or are not so concerned about junior level members of staff because they are more concerned about strategic management of the organization. And so they will know people who can come in at the executive level. So it's going to be really difficult for somebody who's younger to move in. However, many startups find it difficult to hire experienced staff. And so they will tend to go with people with less experience because those people with less experience are willing to take more of a risk. So you could potentially find yourself working in a situation that provides you with that opportunity. That would mean that you'd be looking on job boards for the most part. Having a personal relationship with a founder is really going to be difficult in the beginning. So you're going to want to be trying to apply to jobs in various types of organizations, just like I mentioned before. Practice with your interviewing in the same type or category of startup. And one of the things that would be very helpful when you're talking to the startup is get a sense of the maturity of the founders. And the reason for that is because the startup life is going to be very, very difficult. It's going to be very, very hard. It's going to be difficult for many startup people to have a work-life balance. And so you're going to want people who will have a very clear vision of where they want to go, that the product that they're talking about seems to be useful in your opinion, because it doesn't make sense working on a product that doesn't seem to have much use. Many startup founders will have visions that you can't see, but if you cannot be convinced that you and them can go in the same direction, that may not be the organization for you. You want to make sure that the management team won't implode when things go bad. So you're going to be just looking for those sorts of clues. What is the culture of the organization as well? It's not just finding a startup person. It's not just finding an organization that is going to grow. It's going to be an organization that you can grow in, that you can benefit, and will provide you with opportunities that you can use in other scenarios later on in life. It's maybe not a very definitive answer, but it's an honest answer based on what I have seen. Do you have any other questions? Oh, Pranshu, hang on. Okay. So the question was, when should you start a startup, and what should you be doing? People who tend to start businesses quite often have no choice. They've been thrown into a situation. They've been laid off from a company. There's no other source of income. The job market is weak. They have this vision of something that they want to do to change the world, or see an opportunity to make some money, and they have no choice, so they start the business. People will also have a good chance with starting a business when they have no children, and that the reason for this is because you can focus your entire life on a particular subject area, and don't have to deal with family as much. And so if you can get your startup off the ground as much as possible while you don't have a family, that is really, really good. The last thing that you want is to have problems in the workplace and then also problems at home. And the best times, therefore, are times when there's less or fewer family obligations. So that's why you tend to hear stories of people starting up companies when they're young, or you tend to find them finding opportunities when they are older, when their children have moved out of the home. And so that is a factor. So you ask the question, should you get a few years experience? Should you move direct into a startup? It depends on the scenario. Everyone's going to want somebody with a little bit of experience, no matter what that is. But if you want to start your own business, these are two things that you need to keep in mind. And then, of course, if you're starting a business, and if you're going to be in a risky situation, and you have a family, and because some people just don't have a choice, they want to be in a business, they have a family, they are children. It's always best if you can have some sort of income support, whether it's from family, your partner in life, whoever it may be. That's going to be an important factor as well. When you join a startup, whether it is you who is the founder or you as an employee, you need to really sit down with people in your life. It's really, really important. And the question that you're going to be wanting is like, how do you have happiness both at work and at home? What are you going to do to help ensure that? And what I strongly suggest, no matter what the startup scenario that you're going to find yourself in, is that you ask the person in your life about what is the absolute minimum you want from me. The absolute minimum. And the reason for that is because it's the absolute minimum that you're going to get. Because that is the nature of the startup world. And the goal is to ask for that absolute minimum and then exceed expectations. And that is a really important factor as well. So whether or not you're going to be starting up on your own, whether you're going to be starting up later on, make sure that that is something that you consider as well. So hopefully that answers your question. Many times when you're going to be starting up a company, you will be trying to talk to multiple types of people, friends and family, venture capitalists, etc. Generally speaking, my experience has been when you are talking to venture capitalists, and this is in the United States scenario, I don't know about it in the Indian situation. Venture capitalists will talk to anybody. Nobody wants to say that they were the company that heard about Mark Zuckerberg and never had a chance to speak with them, right? They want to hear all the ideas. They don't want to be left out. The critical thing with a venture capitalist is getting to the second meeting. Everyone will do the first meeting, and the first meeting will be everywhere. And typically what my experience has been is if you present like a non-disclosure agreement, and that when you're talking with the venture capitalist just to talk about a concept, it will turn them off very, very quickly. And the reason being that they see dozens and dozens of these things. It slows things down. And remember, if you really find something, if a venture capitalist hears your idea, it seems like something that's good, they're not going to steal your idea, really, especially at the very early stages. Because they're going to say to themselves, well, the best person to do the job would be you. You're the one that has the vision. You're the person that can have it. And even if they do steal it, who's going to have more vision? Who's going to have more passion to get that job done, to get to where you want to be? It's going to be you. And so talk to them as quickly as possible and talk to as many as you can. Ask them for their impressions. Ask them for people who may be able to help you, because that can be very, very useful. And there was something else. Yes. And this is something that is counterintuitive. You want to get to know quickly. Many people go to venture capitalists and they're begging them, like, please, please, please give me the money that I need, please, right? Get to the venture. You want to get to know quickly, and I'm not really interested, as quickly as you can, because that will now give you time to focus on venture capitalists that are going to be easier, or investors that are going to be easier to work with. And keep that in mind when you're doing your research as well. My experience has been, and I've seen a lot of people go to startups. My general experience has been that the people who have the best outcomes are ones that start out in more mature startups. They start out in like in the Series B, C, D area. The startups may not necessarily go to IPO, but they get some experience. They are in an organization that is growing very rapidly. They get a lot of experience very, very quickly. And so now they can get involved in a startup in Series A, but in a Series A where there is a stronger foundation of venture capital investment. And so that can be an area that you can think of, or a pathway that you can do. There's no single way that's going to be best for anybody in this type of a situation. Be realistic and recognize that not all startups are going to be absolutely successful. You're going to want to have a track record in working with startups, but you don't want to be in a situation where you have a track record of working with startups that fail. So that's why I say, if you can, depending, of course it depends on various factors, work with startups that are a little more established. get the experience in that growth stage, and then move on to more risky ventures now that you've got the experience and have the ability as well. I hope that answered your question. Do you have any others? Okay. Priyanshu, do you have any questions? He's on mute. I don't hear anything. Ankit, do you have any?
You sir.
No? Okay. Azad?
Hello, Peter.
Yes.
First of all, thanks for conducting this meeting. Yeah, the doubt I have is like, how do you manage this work and life balance? Work-life balance. Like you have professional career and also you have this open source thing and also a life to manage. How do you manage?
It's a good question. To some extent, I don't. And so I'll tell you what my day is like. I wake up in the morning at 4 o'clock and I look at my phone and I see a dozen Slack messages. I try to answer them, and then at 5:30 in the morning I go and swim. I swim from 5:30 to about 7 o'clock in the morning, and then I'm in the office, and then between 7 and 9 or 7 and 8 I'm dealing with more Slack messages with the Palisades Foundation. Palisades interrupts my workday, and then at the end of the day I do Palisades as well. And so what I've been trying to do more recently, which is the best practice that I've spoken about before, is that I try to only deal with Palisades external to my workday. And so anything that's going on between 8 o'clock-ish and like 5 or 6 o'clock at night, I try not to get myself involved in. That's the only way that it's going to work. And the other thing that I've been doing is delegating responsibility as well. So I have volunteers from various sources that are doing things like issue assignments and that sort of thing. We've tried to get new contributors in the GitHub area to do the approvals of various PRs, etc. And so you have to really think of ways in which you can make some sacrifices in other areas. So one of the sacrifices that I've made to achieve this is I don't watch any television at all. I don't watch Netflix. I don't do any of that stuff, so that I can spend some time for myself. And so, like 2 hours at the end of the day, I'll try to do something else, read a book or go to the gym or something else, and that provides me with an alternative options for what I need to get done. Just in general, you need to really create boundaries in the organization. It's really in the organization of your life. If you can, try not to. If you can, it's not necessarily the case. Try not to do work while you're on vacation. Try to limit the amount of time that you are working outside of normal working hours. Eventually, if you can create those boundaries and let people know about them, eventually they'll work around your boundaries as well. I understand in the early years of your career, you're going to have less control over that, because if you're an individual contributor, you can't delegate to anybody else, and so therefore you have less time to do other things. So one of the ways in which you can have a better work-life balance is to get a promotion. But then you become a middle manager, and then the middle managers have all these other concerns as well. But if you can delegate something, or have the opportunity to delegate, that will give you more opportunity to have a better work-life balance. Many people will start. I've been on WhatsApp group messages, and they say, I find that I don't have any time to do anything. And my question always is, do you delegate enough? Because if you're not delegating enough, you can't get absolutely everything done. And so I've been doing that with the Palacios Foundation. I do it with my job as well, and it has been very, very helpful. It depends on the culture of the country, the culture of the organization, but hopefully that will help create the boundaries and see how you can become like a team lead fairly reasonably quickly, so that you can have the opportunity to do some delegation and get some stuff done as well. Always, always make time for your own health. Make sure that you go to the gym or do some sort of exercise. Have a methodology of getting some sort of relaxation, and always, as much as you can, just like I mentioned before, work with the people in your life to ask them what is the minimum they require and try to exceed that. So in my particular case, I went and spoke with my wife, and I said to her, what is the absolute minimum that you want from me when I'm going to start my company? And she said, well, I want to make sure that you either pick up or drop off the children every day, and I want to make sure that you are at the major events in their lives, sporting events and things like that. And I made sure that I did not go below that minimum expectation, no matter what. And so if my boss said you can't leave to do these things, I left to get those things done. And when I say my boss at the time was my was the indirectly the various investors and other people in the organization. And so we had to make sure that those things are satisfied. If you're going to be in some sort of a startup environment, once again, the last thing that you want is to have a stressful life at work, and then you come home to more stress. You want to make sure that you minimize that friction, and that's going to be really, really important. It's a good rule of thumb that I would recommend for anybody. All right. Glenn, do you have any questions? Which other companies am I working with other than the Palacios Foundation? Yes, that's right. I do work with some other organizations. I am on the board of trustees for the American Registry of Internet Numbers. They are responsible for allocating IP addresses to organizations and people, I guess, in North America and the Caribbean. And I am on a variety of their committees. In the past, if you can, I don't think I have them on my LinkedIn profile, but I've been on a number of committees, like the Finance Committee, the Governance Committee, Nomination Committee, etc. And so I work with them in that capacity. And that has been another area for me to get involved and provide assistance in the nonprofit world. So Palacios Foundation is completely mine. And then with the ARIN Board of Trustees, it's an elected post. I got lucky about 6 years ago, got on, and I'm coming up to my final term later on this year. So I have an election later on to work with. So that has also been an important factor. I work with the internet community and internet governance behind the scenes as well. And so that's been another area that I work with. Okay. Vamshi, I think you're the last person. Do you have any questions? There's one other thing that I wanted to talk about, and I didn't put this in the presentation. It's about trying to understand people's motivations in life. And this is going to be an important factor in your teams, in working with teams. And the motivation of people is not going to be necessarily obvious. And so therefore you need to be spending a little time observing in the organization to try and think of what's going on, and always try to think of what are the motivations people have. And I'll give you a funny example of this, but it's indicative of what I'm trying to talk about. When I was in university, we had, I guess you could call it a dormitory, and there were two buildings. Each building had 3 floors, and one of the and every year we had like a sports day. People ran around the track. They had football, cricket, etc. And they had like a tug of war. And one of the events that they had was a biscuit eating competition. And in the Caribbean, they have these very, very dry, thick biscuits that won't get soft in the humidity. And we had this biscuit eating competition, and each of the 6 floors would compete, and they'd have teams of 3 or 4 people. And there was a guy that was on campus, in our dorm, that was always asking for these biscuits. Like, do you have any of these biscuits? He always seemed to have a bag of these biscuits in his hand, and everybody thought that he would be the best person to win this competition because he always was eating these biscuits. He knew how to eat them. They're very dry. And the challenge in the eating of these biscuits was that you had a very small glass of water and you had to eat this giant pack of biscuits. And so the competition started. And everybody in all 6 floors were starting to eat their biscuits as quickly as possible, as fast as possible, choking on biscuit crumbs, finishing their water. It was pandemonium. And this guy opened his pack of biscuits really, really slowly and started nibbling on just one. And people are looking at him and saying, "Why aren't you eating biscuits faster? Why? What are you doing? This is just absolutely crazy. I'm betting on you. You're letting down the floor in our dormitory. You're letting down the building. What are you doing? Are you crazy?" And of course, somebody else won. And this guy looked around at everybody else and said, "I only wanted a bag of biscuits." And so think about the motivations of people. Think about how people may be misinterpreting what you're saying, and use that to try and get input into your job. Use that to try and get input into your life, and hopefully things will work out for you for the better. All right, well, I don't think I have anything more to say. I'm assuming that there's nothing more on your side. I will end the discussion. So thank you very much, everybody. This has been really good.